All right, welcome. In this explainer, we're going to get right into one of the absolute fundamentals of Python programming, variables. Getting a good handle on these is, for sure, your first big step toward writing really clean and powerful code.
So let's start with a really basic but super important question. When you run a program, how does it actually remember anything? How does it keep track of a user's name or the current score in a game?
And the answer is, well, pretty simple. It uses something called a variable. You can kind of think of variables as the program's short-term memory. They're the way we store and manage data in pretty much any programming language out there.
Okay, now this is maybe the most important idea to get right from the very beginning. A variable isn't a box that you put information into. It's way more like a label or maybe a sticky note that you attach to a value that's floating around in your computer's memory.
And yeah, this slide really drives that point home, right? Thinking of it like a box can actually get you into a bit of trouble later on. But if you can remember that it's just a label pointing to a value, you're already starting to think like a real Python programmer.
And look how easy it is to actually do. You just come up with a name for your label, use the equal sign, and then tell it what piece of data to point to. And that's it. You've just created your very first variable.
And here's the really cool part. These labels aren't glued on forever. They're totally dynamic. You can at any time tell a label to stop pointing at one thing and point to something completely different. Python just handles it. It moves the label, and if nothing else is pointing to that old value, it just gets cleaned up automatically.
Okay, so we know what variables are, but how do we name them? Well, it turns out there are a few important rules to follow. Let's go over the 5 golden rules for writing code that's clean, easy to read, and free of silly errors.
Rule number 1 is super straightforward. Your variable names can only use letters, numbers, and the underscore character. That's it. No spaces, no hyphens, no dollar signs, or any other special characters. Just letters, numbers, and underscores.
And you can see exactly why right here. A name like message_1 works perfectly. But if you try to use a hyphen, like in my variable, Python gets confused. It sees that minus sign and thinks you're trying to do math, which causes an instant error.
Rule number 2 is a big one. You can't start a variable name with a number. You can have numbers in the name, just not as the very first character. This is a strict rule and Python won't let you break it.
So something like message1 is totally fine, but the moment you flip it to one message, you get a syntax error. The reason is pretty simple. Python needs to be able to tell right away if it's looking at a variable or just a plain old number.
Okay, rule 3 isn't about avoiding errors, it's about writing code that you and other people can actually understand later. Your variable names should be descriptive. The goal is to know exactly what a variable is for just by reading its name.
I mean, just look at the difference this makes. A variable named n is a total mystery. What's n? Who knows? But student name, you know exactly what that is. This makes your code self-documenting. And trust me, that's a habit you want to build from day one.
All right, rule number 4 is all about style. While it's not a hard error, there's a strong convention in the Python community to use all lowercase letters, and if you have multiple words, you separate them with underscores. We call this snake_case.
So sure, you could write first name, that's often called camel case, and your code will run just fine. But using first underscore name is what we call Pythonic. It shows you're following the community style, and it makes your code way easier for other Python developers to read. And finally, rule number 5, this one is non-negotiable. You absolutely cannot use Python's own built-in keywords for your variable names. These are special, reserved words like if, for, or class that have a specific job in the language. This here is such a classic trap. If you create a variable and name it print, you literally overwrite Python's ability to print things. The next time you try to use the print function, your program will just crash. So always use a slight variation like print_message to keep yourself safe.
So, you might be thinking, wow, that's a lot of rules. Are they just here to make things complicated? No, not at all. They're actually here to help you avoid some of the most common and, frankly, most frustrating errors that new programmers run into.
Check this out. This is probably the most common error you'll see when you're starting, a name error. And all this scary-looking message means is, hey, you told me to use a variable called message, but I have no idea what that is. And 9 times out of 10, it's just a simple typo.
And that's exactly why these rules matter. When you follow the rules, especially the one about using descriptive names, a typo like message instead of message sticks out like a sore thumb.
Clear, consistent naming is your best friend when it comes to finding and fixing bugs.
You know, there's this great quote that really just nails this idea. It says that code is read way more often than it's written, and that's so true. You might write a piece of code once, but you and your team might have to read it and understand it dozens of times over the next few years.
So there you go. You now have the single most fundamental tool in your programming toolbox, the power to store, label, and manage information. This opens up a whole world of possibilities, which really just leaves one big exciting question: what are you going to build with it?